Hi, we're going to go ahead and get started. Sorry for the delay, folks. Hello and welcome to NOAA's National Ocean Service Science Seminar Series. My name is Tracy Gill and I am the coordinator for this series. If you're not on the weekly NOAA Science Seminar list but you'd like to be, please email me at tracy.gill@noaa.gov and I will be happy to add you. We have over 40 seminar partners in the NOAA Science Seminar Series and we have lots of great seminars, so we hope you join us. Folks in the room, please sign in and silence your phones. The presenters today are fine with clarifying questions during the seminar. Go ahead and type them into the chat box. But since we got started later, they might not answer them right away. We'll get to them at the end during the Q&A. And if you are interested in getting a PDF copy or video of today's presentation, you can contact tracy.gill@noaa.gov or Gyami Shrestha. And both of our names have been listed in the chat. And now I'm going to pass it over to Gyami.
Thank you, Tracy. My name is Gyami Shrestha. I'm the director of the U.S. Carbon Cycle Science Program Office in Washington, D.C. I'd like to first acknowledge and express my thanks to NOAA for hosting us and for making this series of SOCCR2 Tuesday seminars possible. I'm acknowledging particularly our NOAA CCIWG members of the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group, including James Butler, who will be speaking shortly, Ken Mooney, who's in the room, and other folks, Monica Kopatz, Erika Hombres, and Kathy Tedesco, who are online. This series will go on through May the 28th. You can see several posted on the screen for you to see. We will post this information on carboncyclescience.us along with slides and videos of these talks as they become available. Let me start by introducing the first speaker of the seminar series. I'll be speaking after him. But first, Dr. James Butler will be speaking. Jim is the director of the Global Monitoring Division at NOAA's Earth System Research Lab in Boulder, Colorado, where he has conducted research on climate forcing and ozone depletion for over 30 years. In his current capacity, Dr. Butler oversees the nation's continuing measurements of atmospheric constituents that affect the world's climate, including greenhouse and ozone-depleting gases, aerosols, and surface radiation. Dr. Butler's published works address the distribution and cycling of gases in the atmosphere, their production and consumption by the ocean, their exchange across the air-sea interface, their distribution in polar snow, and methods for their analysis. Jim is a regular contributor to international documents on stratospheric ozone depletion, atmospheric chemistry, and global warming. Jim is also a senior member of the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group, which leads the U.S. Carbon Cycle Science Program, for which I am the director, and it's been a pleasure working with Jim over the last 8 years at a personal level. Jim, it's your turn.
Thank you, Gyami. Thank you for that introduction. I also want to thank Tracy Gill and everybody who works to make these One NOAA seminars come together. There's everything from technical to the science involved and to bringing people together in various ways. So that's much appreciated. So thanks for this opportunity. So what I want to do today is give a brief overview of the Carbon Cycle Science Program, but also NOAA's role in it. This is a NOAA seminar, although I know there's people who are outside of NOAA listening to it. I think mainly I want to focus on how NOAA contributes to the Carbon Cycle Science Program. But this is a multi-agency program. There's 13 agencies on this Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group. And SOCCR2 is our most recent product. It's a decadal survey and assessment and analysis. There's quite a bit that went into it, and I hope you find these discussions that go on for the next several weeks useful in trying to understand the carbon cycle. So the question is, I just did something here to move this. Can I move that down? Okay, good. So one of the questions is, why the big fuss? What is the deal with carbon dioxide? You hear a couple of things. You hear that that has been oscillating in the past, this is nothing new, or doesn't CO2 respond to temperature and not the other way around? So we can answer these questions. First, looking at this plot, which is a plot from ice cores, CO2 measured in ice cores. The more recent measurements are real-time measurements. If you look at this, going back 800,000 years, and don't pay attention to the small print there. That's something you can look at if you get a copy of it. The point here is this curve. And if you look at this, you can see that historically, CO2 has gone from 280 down to 180, and so down to 180, up to 280, 180, 280, 180, etc. And this has oscillated for some time. At 180, we're in an ice age. And at 280, we're in an interglacial. The most recent interglacial is the Holocene, and you can see that's where human civilization evolved. And everything was right for that to happen. It's only about a 10,000 year stretch. And one of the key things is that CO2, which regulates the temperature of the planet to a good degree, was 260 to 280 parts per million during that time. So if we look at the next slide, we can go back and look just say maybe 20,000 years ago. You can see that coming up from 180 to 280 took about 10 to 15,000 years. And that's common. That's common for most of these. And I think most of these interglacials and glacials. But when you get up here, you see there's this flat part here, which is right about there. That's the constant CO2, and during which human civilization evolved. Then there is this rise in CO2 that was rather abrupt, and we're going to take another look at that a little closer. Okay, so atmospheric CO2. For nearly all of Western civilization, CO2 in the atmosphere was at 280 parts per million. You can see that here going back to, say, when Jesus was born, the year 0. You can also see the middle warm period where CO2 was a little higher, early 1,000 to roughly 1,300. And then there's the little ice age where it got a little cooler. And then there's this shoot up here from human emissions. This is pretty unbelievable how fast this latest one has happened relative to the other. If we go to the next section here, you can see that CO2 has increased extremely rapidly since 1900. If you go back to where we have the little ice age, at 1600 or so, you can see it's still cold there. Less CO2 in the atmosphere, the temperature and CO2 working off of each other. If you raise the temperature, CO2 goes up. If you increase CO2, that makes the temperature go up. So you can see that cycle there that happens is a positive feedback. And it will not stop unless something acts on it from the outside. And one of those, during those glacial events and interglacial events you saw, was largely driven by eccentricity in Earth's orbit. But another external influence is putting CO2 into the atmosphere that wasn't there at the time. And that's what we've been doing. So if you look from 1800 to 1900, you can see the CO2 went up about 10 parts per million during the early Industrial Revolution. But from 1900 to roughly 2000, it went up 100 parts per million. And that all happened in 100 years. Remember, the last time it went up 100 parts per million was 10 to 15,000 years. So this is the thing that we have done to this planet. It's a little bit scary in ways. But I think we need to, well, now it doesn't matter what I think. It matters what we do. So anyway, the U.S., this is, let me get this right, sort of an existential threat to human civilization. Civilization existed entirely at 280 parts per million, and now we've seen CO2 jump up rapidly to a value that the Earth has not had a chance to equilibrate to. Next slide. So when they started the U.S. Global Change Research Program, they took this into consideration. They said, you know, we need to do this. Earth is changing. Congress decided that this was something that had to be done. They said federal agencies must work together. They must develop a global change research plan with triennial updates, and they must report annually to the President and Congress. And that happens every year with this volume called Our Changing Planet, in which the agencies report what they have done for each of these efforts. The other thing that happened, though, in 1990 was not just the Global Change Research Act, which was a big deal. It actually provided a lot of funds to make things happen and directed agencies how to use that. But there was also this paper that came out in Science Magazine at that time by Peter Tans, Taro Takahashi, and Inez Fung. Tans worked at NOAA. Takahashi was at Lamont Doherty Geological Observatory. It's now called Lamont Doherty Earth Observatory. And Inez Fung was at NASA at the time. But the paper revolutionized carbon cycle science. They identified a previously unknown, very large sink for atmospheric CO2. It had to be a terrestrial sink, and it had to be in the northern hemisphere. And that was based on constraints placed by atmospheric observations and ocean observations. Pretty much sounds like Noah's mission, right? So if you look at this overall picture, and this is a schematic, and I apologize, the numbers are in here for the North American continent only, but if you take it schematically, it still applies to the globe. Before this paper was published, this is how we saw the carbon cycle. There were fossil fuel emissions, some land use problems that were putting more water, CO2 into the atmosphere, and the ocean took up CO2. We knew that. But this paper demonstrated that there was another component to this, and that a large amount of CO2 was being taken up by the terrestrial biosphere in the northern hemisphere. And that changed everything, because we had no idea how that was going about. When new plants took up CO2 in the spring and emitted it back in the fall, you see that in the seasonal cycle. This long-term storage was quite significant. And that was a major finding that really revolutionized the science. So when the Carbon Cycle Science Program was started, they made sure that there was a Carbon Cycle Interagency working group. And that was all part of the U.S. Global Change Research Program. You can see there's different interagency working groups, and the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group is one of them. Go back down here. Okay. So how does the Carbon Cycle Science Program function? The Interagency Working Group oversees all of this. There are 3 programs within Carbon Cycle Science Program right now. One focuses on North American carbon, another one is ocean biogeochemistry, the other one's international activities. We have plans for each one of these programs and a plan for the overall, we have plans for the North American and ocean carbon programs, and we have an overall plan for the Carbon Cycle Science Program overall. But what really makes this work is the way it was been implemented over time. There are monthly meetings of the Interagency Working Group. They used to be every 3 weeks. In fact, a long time ago, they used to be 3 hours every 3 weeks. Today, we're a little more efficient. There's also the 3 scientific steering groups that meet every 6 months, and there is the All Investigators meeting that occurs every 1.5 to 2 years, and international events and meetings as they come up. And there's a number of those. But it's these scientific steering groups, the Interagency Working Group regular meetings, and the All Investigator meetings that really keep this program going. The program produces a lot of publications. A lot of it comes from the various scientists that are working on it, and they often work together in a coordinated way because of this program. The State of the Carbon Cycle report we did that back in 2007, and actually started hopefully getting it done in 2005, and it took longer than thought. But it was something that the scientific community decided was needed. But also politically, when President Bush came on board, they created the Climate Change Science Program and wanted to have synthesis and assessment reports. So people were working on this first SOCCR assessment, and it sort of got wrapped into this synthesis and assessment report process. So it's sort of known by 2 names, but we refer to it as the first SOCCR report, first State of the Carbon Cycle report. The second report, which just came out here this last year, it updates our understanding of the carbon cycle. The first report touched largely on the physical aspects of this, the physical and biological and chemical aspects of it, with some discussion of the energy systems, the waste systems, and those kinds of things that give rise to carbon in the atmosphere. But this second report updates our understanding from past 10 years, but it includes a strong emphasis on the human element, which is huge. And a lot of energy went into it. If we look a little closer to the second report, there are 4 major sections. The state of the land, air, and water is one section. There's several chapters in each one. There's one on the human dimensions. That's the one that I think has really been accelerated a lot since the last one. A synthesis and consequences and way forward. So this is stepping up a bit. It's more than just the physical system. The humans are involved, and we can't forget that. So what are NOAA's contributions? Atmospheric observations. The long-term atmospheric observations are largely NOAA's Global Monitoring Division. But there are other atmospheric observations as well. Scripps Institution of Oceanography puts in some long-term observations. OAR's Climate Program Office funds work for various process studies. Quite a bit gets done through that. But NOAA has a lot to do with the atmosphere. It's the only agency in the U.S. that has any kind of atmospheric focus and mission. So if we look at what comes out of this, now this top map, you can see this is just the sites that we have right now where we're getting regular measurements of CO2 and methane and other greenhouse gases. In some places continuously, and in some places the slowest we get it is like every week. So we're getting a pair of flasks every week from all of those sites, and then we're also getting continuous measurements at many of them. So there's a lot of information that comes in. Been doing this for about 50 years. What do we get out of this? If you look at the bottom plot, you can see, let me get the arrow up here. Here's a curve of CO2 in the atmosphere. You've seen that in various forms. This was taken directly from the SOCCR2 report. And you can see is the increase going up, and you can also see the seasonal cycles. But having a pretty good idea of what the fossil fuel emissions are each year, as Department of Energy compiles that every year, and that's good to within plus or minus 5%. The atmospheric measurements are good within about 0.1%. And if you look at that and say, okay, we're going to subtract what we see in the atmosphere each year from what's emitted each year, and it turns out to be there's some left over. And that leftover is taken up by the Earth system, and that is these blue bars down here. And that's a measure of how much CO2 is taken up by the ocean and the terrestrial systems. How much of the fossil fuel CO2 has been taken up by those systems. That is a very important constraint on atmospheric models to try to understand the system. Similarly for methane, it's a little simpler. You have the growth rate of methane over here, and we know the lifetime of methane is about 10 years, so you put that into the equation, and you end up with the red bars down here for the fluxes of methane. So you can see methane sources and the terrestrial and ocean ecosystems take up the CO2. Yeah. So that's what we get out of atmospheric measurements. We get a lot more, but that's one of the big ones. If we go to the next slide, there's ocean measurements as well. NOAA does a lot for measuring CO2 in the ocean. We have ocean measurements are more expensive and less frequent. It's a long-term internationally coordinated effort. Blue lines in the top figure are U.S. observations. Half of those are from NOAA. So you can say that U.S. provides maybe half of the observations, and that NOAA provides half of those. Ballpark estimate there. The plot below shows the increase in CO2 in the ocean. Now there's different analyses here, so they're not all going to agree in absolute amount, but if you follow them, you can see the trends are pretty much the same. It states that it shows generally that the CO2 in the ocean is generally keeping up with what's in the atmosphere. A good fraction of the CO2 emitted each year is taken up by the ocean, and we've known that for some time. These are NOAA's contributions. They are not insignificant. Let's take a look at the Atmospheric Composition and Chemistry and Carbon Cycle Program. It's called AC4. Ken Mooney and Monica Kopatz run that program. This is an important program in the Climate Program Office. They They fund many projects to support our understanding of the carbon cycle. Some of them are internal, some are external. Often, not always, funding is coordinated with other agencies when it's practical. These touch on several categories you can see here in this list: understanding human and natural processes, method development, validation of satellite retrievals, and assessments. This picture here on the right is a picture of Air Corps. It's one of the experiments that came out of the Global Monitoring Division. It's a great way of getting, basically you take a core of the atmosphere so you can get the total column and get it in detail. There's a lot to be said about that, but I won't be able to say that here. We also have an ocean acidification program. That is a fairly new program. It's been around for a while, though. But acidification of the ocean by increasing CO2 in the atmosphere is unquestionable. There's only one way to stop ocean acidification. That's stop emitting CO2 in the atmosphere. But that eventually will happen. But in the meantime, there are ways to understand and deal with it. And there's a lot of need for research. How is that going to impact our ecosystems? How are those going to impact on humans? And how does that impact on civilization? The Ocean Acidification Program conducts a number of activities to understand the impact of CO2 on ocean activity. It's monitoring, research, coordination among agencies and international coordination, education, and outreach. So those are the things that NOAA does to help drive this program. I'm going to leave it to the next speaker, Gyami, to tell us more about the program. But if any of you want more information and want to follow up on what I've said, you can reach me here at NOAA. One other point I wanted to make. It looks like I forgot about the international engagement. There's so much we do on international engagement in NOAA. Let me see. I could probably do a dozen slides on it, but I'm not going to. But the kinds of interactions we have they're varied in nature. For example, there's bilateral agreements that we have, some just to fill flasks or operate instruments, others to work together on various problems. There's participation on ships from different programs in different nations, participation in numerous international programs and their committees, and this takes you down the awful acronym soup of things like the Global Ocean Observing System, the Integrated Ocean Observing System, the Global Atmosphere Watch, Global Climate Observing System, etc. Global Carbon Project, Integrated Carbon, it goes on and on. So I won't bore you with all of those. Just note that this list is just a small list, and these two pictures are simply representative of a small part of what we do internationally. And I think the other agencies can say the same, and this is where a lot of this comes to play in the Carbon Cycle program. So anyway, as I was saying, if you have more information, desire more information, this is my contact information. I do want to call your attention, though, to this one link here, right there. Oh, I think I lost it. I did something wrong. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, I kept remembering I have to click the arrow and then push the button. All right. Anyway, that link right there. If you look at that link, you can see it's a movie. It's about a 3.5-minute movie. It's put together by Andy Jacobson of NOAA's Global Monitoring Division. If the first few slides of this presentation interested you at all, I would recommend you take a look at that movie. You can pause it anywhere you want and think about where you paused and what that means. So I think I'm done. And if there's time for questions, I can answer a couple of questions. If not, we can go on. I can introduce Gyami as the next speaker.
Yeah, if there are no pressing questions, okay, we'll take one and then we'll just move on and hold the questions till the end since we got a late start. But I see Lee King has a quick question. We'll go ahead, and while we're doing that, I will switch the slides. Thanks, Jim.
Sure enough.
Yeah. Oh, so leave it on him.
You switch the slides, I can't introduce Gyami.
Right, she didn't do that. I'm going back. Okay, I don't see the question, so why don't you go ahead?
All righty.
Thank you.
So, well, Gyami's already spoken a little bit, but I wanted to say a few words. Dr. Shrestha hails from Nepal. Her academic career is focused on Earth's environmental systems, completing her PhD at the University of California, Merced in 2011. She has experience in soil sciences, water, ecosystems research. She understands how to work the interface between science and society and is skilled in management and leadership. Most importantly, with these skills and capabilities, she has overseen the U.S. Carbon Cycle Science Program as its director since 2011. Given that this represents 13 agencies, up to 200 scientists at any one time, and all their quirks, it's not a trivial task. I've thoroughly enjoyed working with Gyami these past years and find her dedication, perseverance, and overall commitment to the mission to be inspiring and invigorating. So, Gyami, you can take it away and give us the remainder on the SOCCR2 product.
Okay, go ahead.
Thank you, Jim. Thanks for your very comprehensive talk and that very nice introduction. I would also, again, thank the co-coordinator of the seminar series, Tracy Gill, before I start. Okay, the title of my talk is From Science to Solutions, the State of the Carbon Cycle Assessment, which is essentially the title of the seminar series. I would like to acknowledge Dr. Nancy Cavallaro from USDA NIFA and Dr. Zhiliang from USGS, who are also online. They are the co-authors of this slide set. Most of what I will talk about during this presentation covers topics topics and chapters of SOCCR2, which is the second state of the carbon cycle science report. You are able to download PDFs of this assessment via carbon2018.globalchange.gov. If you are using social media, please use hashtag SOCCR2 SOCCR2. One thing that we also need to mention is that this interagency partnership is 20 years old, and that's what you see on the right. And our main website is carboncyclescience.us. Production facts. SOCCR2, the second state of the carbon cycle science report, contains 878 pages that include a preface, a 4-page plain language highlights, a technical executive summary, 4 sections encompassing 19 chapters, followed by 7 appendices. This was developed by over 200 diverse cross-sectoral experts from the United States, Mexico, Canada, Australia, Cyprus, and Hong Kong. We cited over 3,764 publications, going through them and assessing the science that is represented in the report. 33 chapter leads took charge of 19 chapters with 200 contributing authors, and 5 science leads who took care of the cross-chapter section coordination. 11 review editors made sure that all the review comments were handled properly during the revision phases toward the end of the report production process. The entire report formulation and production took 3 years, from 2015 to 18. We produced over 6 drafts, which were reviewed over 6 times, including by the public and the U.S. National Academy of Sciences, which publicly sought nominees for that committee that reviewed the report. 21 federal steering committee members and federal liaisons, many of whom are online on this call, on this webinar, also took care of making sure that that they were able to provide federal expertise based on their own federal program portfolios and their own scientific backgrounds. We also made the author responses to public comments and NAS comments public on carbon2018.globalchange.gov. The final clearance of the report was carried out by 13 US government agencies and departments, which led to the final release of the report on Friday, November the 23rd, 2018. This flowchart is mainly meant to convey the convoluted process of the report formulation steps from beginning from its early approval or green lighting by the Subcommittee on Global Change Research to the very and going through different steps and public engagement processes. We kept all this very transparent from beginning to end, and we worked really hard to engage the public throughout different steps, which I will describe later. The first public engagement steps included the release of a draft prospectus in early 2016 via Federal Register notice, which also included a public call for author nominations to ensure a very diverse range of expertise, range of career stages, and geographic locations for the different author teams for the report. We also sought technical input via the same Federal Register notice. We also conducted a public forum around the same time to seek input on the prospectus very early on during the process, and also organized a number of other public events at different scientific meetings throughout the process. In the middle of the production period, we conducted a public call for review editors, who provided an important layer of external independent validation during the process of addressing public and public comments, and also comments from the National Academy of Sciences. Finally, between November 2017 and January 2018, we provided the public an opportunity to review the fourth order draft via a Federal Register notice and several other outlets. Concurrently, the National Academy of Sciences committee reviewed the same draft through March of 2018. This diagram shows a very high-level overview of the team structure. We undertook this 3-year process under the auspices of the U.S. Global Change Research Program, with the Carbon Cycle Interagency Working Group as the lead interagency body, and with USDA as the lead agency for legal and administrative purposes. The U.S. Carbon Cycle Science Program Office, which I'm in charge of, led the coordination efforts among the different entities, which also included Oak Ridge National Lab editors who took charge of copy editing and throughout each of the drafting phases, and also produced the final PDFs. So what is the second state of the carbon cycle report, which we abbreviate as SOCCR2? SOCCR2 is an authoritative interagency assessment of the state of the carbon cycle across North America, emphasizing advances in the understanding of carbon cycle science and associated human dimensions of the carbon cycle across land, air, and water since 2007. It is written by a team of America's top experts in carbon cycle science, and it also contributes to Volume 2 of the 4th National Climate Assessment, which is congressionally mandated. The authors include representatives from the government, national labs, universities, research institutions, and the private sector across the US, Canada, and Mexico. SOCCR2 was also conducted as part of the US Global Change Research Program's Sustained Assessment Goal, focusing on US and North America, but considering the global context in our assessment. It includes relevant carbon management science and information about tools and informing decisions. It is policy relevant, but not policy prescriptive. So it's only meant to inform policies. We did not prescribe any policies in this assessment. We drew on a wide range of scientific and technical inputs, and we operated on a clear science communication principles, sets of principles, and we ensured transparency of process and information. It is also, as Jim mentioned earlier, SOCCR2 is a follow-up to the first SOCCR published in 2007, and it meets the science requirements addressed in the US Global Change Research Program Strategic Plan and the US Carbon Science Plan, which is a community-driven effort. It highlights, among many other things, the carbon dynamics in North America and the United States in a global context, highlights fossil fuels and economic impacts, the changing landscape of North America, also addresses ocean acidification, Arctic changes, carbon in crops and agriculture, indigenous communities, cities and carbon, societal relevance, and many other aspects that I'll talk about more later. Each chapter, as appropriate. No, next slide. Yeah. Includes the following components: an introduction, the historical context, the current understanding of carbon fluxes, a section on indicators, trends, and feedbacks, the regional context, the global context, the North American context, a note, a section on societal drivers, impacts, and carbon management decisions. And finally, each chapter contains a section on synthesis, knowledge gaps, and future outlooks. Each chapter contains 2 to 6 key findings, which are a culmination of the author team's expert judgment of the major synthesis points of the scientific literature they assessed for each chapter. The supporting text provides evidence and discusses implications of each of those key findings. Each of those key findings is accompanied by a traceable account or a supplementary evidence at the end of each chapter. These supplementary evidence sections provide additional information to readers about the quality of the information used, allows traceability, documents the process and rationale to reach a particular key finding and conclusion, and also that describes the level of likelihood and confidence in the key finding. As mentioned earlier, the report contains 4 sections: synthesis, human dimensions of the carbon cycle, the state of the air, land, air, and water, consequences, and way forward. You can download each of the sections individually via carbon2018.globalchange.gov. And and this shows basically all the chapters in each section. As you see, we cover everything from energy systems to tribal lands, from observations of atmospheric carbon dioxide to coastal ocean and continental shelves, biogeochemical cycling, and the future and projections of the North American carbon cycle. Very important also are the 7 appendices at the end of the assessment, which cover very briefly a number of topics that you may have a harder time learning more about elsewhere, such as Appendix E, which covers carbon measurement approaches and accounting frameworks very succinctly, and also a note, the Appendix E on fossil fuel emissions estimates for North America and how we've done that in this report. So take a look. We also cover the information quality process that we used in this assessment in the appendix. Again, going back to the website, carbon2018.globalchange.gov. This one.
Yeah. This one. Sorry, I was going to do that.
Sorry, we're trying to coordinate. Sorry. If you go to our website, you are now able to download translations of the four-page plain language highlights in Chinese, Spanish, and French. These translations were conducted by volunteer federal steering committee members and carbon cycle interagency working group members. And you can also download all the PDFs for free. You are able to order the report in brief for free also from this website. So please do so. The preface, I forgot to mention, is also of interest if you want to know more about the development of the report, the reviews, carbon accounting processes and methods, the uncertainty and confidence used throughout the report, and also the interagency context of US carbon cycle science that Jim described a bit earlier. Next slide. This is a quick overview so far since its release. SOCCR2 has been viewed by over 10,500 users from 116 nations and 2,967 cities. And the estimated reach via news and social media is around a few millions. These are some of the. These slides cover some of the news coverage following the release on November the 23rd. Much of the coverage was associated with the National Climate Assessment, so they were in the same news pieces. The National Climate Assessment focused a lot on the impacts and the risks of climate change. The news coverage caught on the fact that the second state of the carbon cycle report presents a more positive viewpoint and a solutions-oriented approach for mitigating and managing carbon, which we also take positively. The report also became known as the Other Report that was released the same day as the National Climate Assessment. Quickly, some major themes, quick findings that I want to go through over the next few slides. And I want to make sure that you all understand that the next few Tuesday talks that you will be able to listen to in the next few weeks will cover all of this in much more detail. And so please don't forget to log in to listen to those talks in the next few weeks. I'll be going very quickly at a very high level. So some three key findings from SOCCR2 is that in the last decade, since SOCCR2 is a decadal assessment of carbon across North America, what SOCCR2 found is that fossil fuels are still the largest source of carbon in North America. Aquatic systems are both sources and sinks of carbon. Land and coastal waters are sinks of carbon in North America, but the sinks may see changes in the future. Okay, next slide. The energy sector and transportation continues to be the largest source of carbon emissions across North America, but significant reductions in these sources are possible with current technologies. Emissions due to energy use, fossil fuel-based energy use decreased, and the increase in these emissions globally has slowed down. And this key finding particularly has been echoed by many other current reports and studies, including one that came out this week from the Global Carbon Project that showed 18 countries that also decreased their energy-based carbon consumptions quite a bit. Also, as land and coastal waters are sinks of atmospheric carbon across North America, taking up about 1/3 to 1/2 of total emissions. And soils and croplands, rangelands, grasslands, forests continue to have a strong potential for carbon sequestration. Some of the sinks are diminishing in strength, and many are at risk due to increasing disturbance in forests, such as fires, pests, invasive species. and increasing land use pressure on all ecosystems. Conversion of peatland soils accounts for the largest emissions from soils. Accelerated warming in Arctic regions creates vulnerability of large stores of carbon in permafrost soils. This is a very key major finding. The United States is responsible for about 80 to 85% of fossil fuel emissions from North America. However, afforestation, reduced deforestation, restoration of coastal areas and terrestrial wetlands, improved land management practices in forests, grasslands, and croplands continue to maintain or increase ecosystem carbon sinks, while helping to decrease the emissions of carbon to the atmosphere. Globally, about 11 to 13% of ecosystem carbon removal can be, or sequestration can be attributed to North American ecosystems. Over the last decade, North America alone reduced its annual fossil fuel carbon dioxide emissions by 1%. How did that happen? Through improvements in market technologies and policy drivers. And the economy recovered with increased energy efficiency in the last few years, and this also, even though, and then we were also able to reduce our CO2 emissions in spite of that. Cities have become the largest emitters, and one very good thing is the report also highlights how tribes and indigenous communities across the US, Canada, and Mexico have been employing many sustainable practices to manage carbon across their ecosystems. So that's a very, very good thing. Next slide. So some major new achievements since SOCCR1. Again, like SOCCR2 contains many positive integrated social science and tribal perspective focused chapters, enhancing the integration of natural sciences with sustainability perspectives, promoting solutions-oriented science. Also, thanks to improved carbon observations, SOCCR2 shows a more complete and better attributed carbon budget in North America, conversions between top-down, that is atmospheric observations, and bottom-up, that is in situ and inventories estimations. Future projections shown in the assessment are more robust with enhanced observations tools for their interpretation. Coastal wetlands, estuaries, and coastal waters are included in the budget for the first time, in the carbon budget for the first time. Lateral transports are more consistently determined over space and time. I think I already, we're going to, sorry, oops. I wanted to also mention that some other reports came out around the same time as SOCCR2, such as the negative emissions report from the National Academy of Sciences, the improving characterization of anthropogenic methane emissions, also from the National Academy of Sciences, the IPCC 1.5 degrees Celsius report, and also the global carbon budget produced by the Global Carbon Project folks, and of course the National Climate Assessment. All of these reports and many other studies echo many of the SOCCR2 findings, informing decisions for carbon management and mitigation. Speakers in this series in the following Tuesdays will go through some of these key findings that are echoed by other studies also. Next slide. Closing thoughts. We went through a lot, and I mean, most of what I said is also found in the report in brief. What I would say is that we talked a lot about the science of carbon cycling, and SOCCR2 covers different ecosystems, societies, impacts, so on and so forth. And we also need to remember that carbon management, carbon science can also help with co-benefits such as improvements in air quality, crop productivity, energy efficiency, economic savings to taxpayers, enhanced quality of life, and all of these. I mean, when we look at all of that, those also often result from reduction in carbon emissions. These are some photos of our much broader team, and you have some of these folks speaking with you in the next couple of weeks as part of the series. And finally, if you have questions, feel free to contact me. And again, the website to download the report. Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everyone.
Great, thank you. All right. And thank you, Jim. Folks online, if you have any questions, you can type them into the chat box now. I see there's already been a few questions asked, and Jim was able to answer them. And I'm also going to, should I put back up the series list?
Yes.
Okay, yeah. We'll put up back the series list so you can see some of the series. Feel free to type your questions. We do have a few more minutes left. Okay, are there any other questions? We will meet next Tuesday for our next report, which is, hold on, I'm trying to pull that up.
It's going to be Sarah Cooley, I think.
Oh, yeah, Sarah Cooley. Okay, so let's see. Yeah, so next week we'll have Rising Carbon Dioxide's Effects on Land and Ocean by Sarah Cooley, Director of Ocean Acidification Program at Ocean Conservancy. And David Moore also there?
He's the co-author.
Oh, and David Moore, Associate Professor, University of Arizona. So we hope you can join us. Well, if there are no more questions, anybody? We'll talk to you next Tuesday at the same time, and hopefully we won't have this problem we had at the beginning. I apologize for that. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Jim, any last words?
Nothing brilliant comes to mind, but thank you again for doing this. I look forward to catching some of the other presentations. This is a very significant assessment, and I'm sorry that it had to come out at the same time as the national assessment, which, as Gyami mentioned, sort of overshadowed it at the time. But it's a very important component of that, and both of them are U.S. Global Change Research Program products. I think they're both signs of some real successes we've taken as a result of this program, and I look forward to it all continuing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. And again, for everyone, we will be posting PDFs of the presentations and videos of the presentations, and also the full list of the upcoming Tuesday carbon seminars on carboncyclescience.us. Again, carboncyclescience.us.
And I just sent you and Tracy my presentation with the talking points in it, so when you post them, people can see at least see what I was supposed to say.
Okay. Thanks, Jim, and thanks for attending, everybody.
Yeah.
Take care.
Thank you.
See you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.